It started on a slow Thursday night at Carmine's Pizza, a little hole-in-the-wall place in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. I had been delivering pizzas there for just over a year, mostly night shifts, which I preferred since the tips were better and the traffic was lighter. It was the kind of job that felt repetitive and predictable until something out of the ordinary happened. And sometimes, in my line of work, ordinary could turn downright eerie. That evening, the sky was a murky gray, heavy with the threat of rain. The streets were almost deserted, save for the occasional late-night driver or the distant hum of a car radio. I was about halfway through my shift when the phone rang. I wiped the sweat from my brow. Despite the cold air, the heat lamps in the kitchen made it warm inside, and answered. "Carmine's Pizza, this is Mike speaking. How can I help you?" A pause, then a voice came through the receiver, low, rough, and oddly distant. "Hello, I'd like to order a large pepperoni, extra cheese. Delivery, please." "Sure thing. Can I get the address?" 112 Maple Street, please. I jotted it down and repeated it back. 112 Maple Street? Got it. That'll be about 30 minutes. The order seemed straightforward. Maple Street was a quiet residential area not far from the shop, lined with old trees and modest houses. I wasn't surprised by the address today, but something about the voice unsettled me. It was almost too calm, too monotone. I told my coworker Gina to start the order, then hopped in my car to make the delivery. I always liked that part of the job, the drive, because it let me clear my head and enjoy some solitude. Plus, it gave me a chance to listen to music without interruptions. When I reached Maple Street, it was nearly empty. The streetlights flickered in the mist, casting long shadows across the pavement. The house numbers glowed faintly in the darkness, the lawns overgrown and damp. I pulled up to number 112, a two-story colonial with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The porch light was on, dim and flickering as if it were struggling to stay lit. I grabbed the pizza box and stepped out of the car, the cool dampness clinging to my jacket. I rang the doorbell, a long pause, no answer. I knocked on the door. Still silence. I called out, "Hello? Pizza delivery." Nothing. I checked my phone to confirm the order. The number matched the one on the receipt, but no one answered. Curious, I looked around the porch. The door was old, with a small window near the top, and through the glass I thought I saw movement. A shadow flickered briefly. Then, from inside, a voice called out softly, "Just a minute." I waited. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. A man stood there, thin and pale, with sunken eyes and a faint smell of smoke around him. He wore a worn bathrobe that looked like it hadn't been washed in days. "Here you go," I said, holding out the pizza. He took it without a word, eyes fixed on the box. "Can I get your signature, please?" He didn't respond. I repeated myself, but he just nodded slowly, reaching into his pocket. His hand trembled as he pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and placed it on the porch. "No tip?" He didn't look up, just muttered, "Keep the change." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. Something was off. I gave him a nod and headed back to my car. As I walked away, I glanced back. The man was still standing in the doorway, staring blankly ahead. Then, without warning, he disappeared. I blinked and looked again. The door was shut tight. I shook my head and got back in the car, trying to brush off the weirdness. Maybe he was just a quiet guy who didn't want to talk. I started the engine and pulled away. That was the first strange delivery. Later that night, when I returned to the shop, I told Gina about it. She laughed and said, "Sounds like the ghost customer. We get calls sometimes for that house. No one lives there anymore." I was skeptical. I figured she was joking. But then the phone rang again. It was 11:45 p.m. The same voice, the same order. Large pepperoni, extra cheese, delivery to 112 Maple Street. I stared at the phone. Is this some kind of prank? Silence. Then, please. I couldn't refuse. I was getting curious now. I told Gina to make another pizza while I prepared to go back. The second delivery was even weirder. This time, when I knocked, no one answered. I waited 5 minutes, then called out, "Pizza here." Still nothing. I looked around. The house seemed darker, colder. The windows were fogged up from the inside. I set the pizza down on the porch and took a step back. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, just barely audible. "Thank you." I turned, but no one was there. I jumped back into my car, uneasy. When I got back to the shop, I told Frank, the manager, "That house has been abandoned for years," he said. "Nobody lives there since the family disappeared." "What happened?" I asked. He shrugged. "Some kind of tragedy. Fire, maybe. No one talks about it much. Weird that someone would order pizza from there." Over the next few nights, the calls kept coming. Each time, the order was the same: large pepperoni, extra cheese, 112 Maple Street. Sometimes I delivered it, sometimes I refused, but the calls never stopped. One night, after a delivery, I swore I saw a figure standing in the upstairs window, watching me. My curiosity morphed into obsession. I started researching the house. Local news archives revealed that in 1982, a fire had destroyed the home at 112 Maple Street. The family of three was never found. They were presumed dead or missing. The cause was never determined. The story chilled me. Was I delivering pizzas to a house that didn't exist anymore? To ghosts? One night I decided to find out. I drove to Maple Street after closing. The air was crisp and the fog had thickened. I approached the house cautiously. The door was boarded up, but the porch light was on, still flickering. I knocked on the boards. A voice, faint and distant, whispered, "Thank you." I stepped back, heart racing. Then I saw a figure in the window, a man, the same pale man from the first delivery. He smiled sadly. I turned and left. I never took another call from 112 Maple Street. To this day, I don't know if that was a ghost, a prank, or something else. But every time I drive past that street, I feel eyes on me. And sometimes late at night, my phone rings. 112 Maple Street, large pepperoni, extra cheese. Story the end. It started as a regular Friday night delivery shift at the small pizza place where I worked. I was 22, and the job was nothing fancy, just stacking boxes, taking orders, and delivering pies around a medium-sized city in the Midwest. The kind of place where everybody knows your name, or at least your car, because you're always weaving through the same streets. That night, the kitchen was busy, and the phone was ringing off the hook. I had just finished dropping off an order to a high-rise downtown when the dispatcher handed me a new ticket. The order was for a large pepperoni with extra cheese and a side of garlic knots, going to a neighborhood I barely knew. An older part of town on the edge of the city, where the streetlights flickered and the houses looked like they'd been left behind decades ago. The address was for a house on Maple Drive, number 237. I'd driven by it before, but never delivered there. The neighborhood was full of those worn-down houses with peeling paint, crooked mailboxes, and overgrown lawns. It had that uneasy vibe, like the place was stuck in time, forgotten by everyone except the few residents who still clung to their homes. I pulled up to the curb just past 11 p.m., parking under a dim, buzzing streetlight. The house at 237 Maple was a small, two-story wooden structure that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 60s. Yellowing curtains hung in the windows, stained and tattered. The porch sagged a little, and the front steps had cracks deep enough to trip you if you weren't paying attention. I grabbed the pizza bag and walked up to the front door. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of a dog barking and the rustle of dry leaves swirling in the wind. The door had a faded wreath hanging on it, some fake autumn leaves that looked like they'd been there for years. I rang the doorbell once and waited. Nothing. I knocked gently, but still no response. The air felt heavier, colder than the night should have been, and I got the sense that someone was watching me from inside the house. I stepped back, unsure, but then the door creaked open a crack. A woman's face appeared, pale, with dark circles under tired eyes, her hair stringy and unkempt. She looked at me without speaking, just staring. "Pizza delivery," I said, holding up the bag. She didn't say a word, but stepped aside just enough for me to slip in. The door closed softly behind me. The house smelled stale, like old wood and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. I glanced around as my eyes adjusted to the dim light. The living room was furnished with worn, mismatched pieces covered in dusty sheets. A ceiling fan spun lazily, though the air was still. "Where should I put this?" I asked. She pointed toward a side table near the hallway. I placed the pizza bag down and turned to leave, but before I could step toward the door, she spoke for the first time. "Did you bring the pepperoni?" "Yeah," I replied, glancing down at the box. She nodded, but there was something strange in her tone, like a faint echo or distortion, almost not right. My skin prickled. Then she said, "He's waiting for you." I froze. "Who?" I asked, but the room felt suddenly colder, and the shadows in the corners seemed to thicken. She smiled, but it was empty, almost forced. Then, without another word, she slipped past me into the hallway. I backed toward the door and slipped out, closing it behind me. The street was still quiet, but the weight on my chest didn't lift. I got back into my car, hands trembling slightly, and headed back to the shop. I told my manager about the strange delivery, and he nodded slowly. "That place has a history," he said. "I heard a family lived there years ago, and the husband killed his wife and then himself. No one's lived there since." I didn't sleep well that night. The image of the woman's face and the words, "He's waiting for you," haunted me. A few days later, I looked up the address online. The story was true. Police reports from a decade ago detailed the tragedy. The woman's name was Mary, her husband David. He was said to be violent and jealous. The house had been empty since the murders. Some drivers told me they'd had odd experiences delivering there. Cold spots, feelings of being watched, and sometimes the front door opening on its own. One even said the pizza was found untouched on the porch the next day, despite the order being marked delivered. I stopped taking deliveries to Maple Drive after that, but the memory stayed with me. Late at night, sometimes I'd hear the faint sound of a doorbell and footsteps or a whispered warning, "He's waiting." It was real. I know it was. Story the end. The first time I picked up the pizza delivery job, I thought it was just going to be a way to pay rent on time and maybe have some fun driving around town at night. I was 21, fresh out of a dead-end retail gig, and looking for something with a little more freedom. Angelo's Pizzeria was hiring, a local joint with a good reputation for quality pies and a laid-back atmosphere. I figured delivering pizzas meant late nights, some random tips, and maybe a chance to listen to music alone while I drove around the city streets. It started off normal. I worked the evening shift around 5 p.m. until close, usually midnight. The customers ranged from families ordering dinner to college kids who somehow always managed to eat more than they paid for. I got to know the neighborhood well, the usual stuff: traffic, bad addresses, doorbells that didn't work, and people who expected their orders to magically appear seconds after calling. One night, though, everything changed. I still think about it sometimes, even though I wish I could forget. It was the tail end of October, a Tuesday. The weather was chilly but not freezing yet, with the kind of mist that settles into the trees and makes everything feel a little damp and cold. The shop was busy all evening, and by the time 11 p.m. rolled around, I was pretty tired but ready to head home. That's when the phone rang again. One last delivery. The address was on Marrow Lane, a dead-end street on the outskirts of town I didn't know well. Angelo looked at me and said, "You're close by anyway. Take it." I glanced at the clock. It was 11:15. A little late, but I was used to odd hours. I grabbed the order, a large Supreme extra cheese and a 2-liter soda, and headed out. Marrow Lane was quiet. Too quiet. The street was lined with old trees that hung over the cracked pavement, their branches like fingers reaching down to snag passing cars. The only light came from a flickering street lamp near the end of the road. I pulled up to the house number. It was an old 2-story with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. The windows were dark, no signs of life inside. The yard was overgrown with weeds and fallen leaves. No car in the driveway. Nothing about it looked inviting. I grabbed the pizza box and walked up the steps, my breath coming out in small clouds in the cold air. I rang the doorbell once and waited. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no sound at all. I knocked on the door. Still nothing. I was about to turn around when I heard a voice from inside. Low, raspy, almost a whisper. "Leave it on the table." The voice was faint, but I caught it clearly enough. I peered inside through the grimy window beside the door. The room beyond was pitch black, except for a faint glow coming from what looked like a flickering TV screen. I set the pizza box down on the porch and called out, "I'm just leaving the pizza here, okay?" There was no response. I turned back toward my car when the door creaked open slowly. My heart jumped. I didn't expect anyone to come out. I took a cautious step back. A figure appeared in the doorway, a man, mid-30s maybe, with pale skin and dark eyes that caught the moonlight. His clothes looked outdated, like something from the 80s or early 90s. His face was gaunt and his lips moved as if he were muttering to himself. "You're late," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I blinked, confused. Sorry, I just got here. He looked right at me, but his eyes didn't seem focused. More like he was seeing through me, beyond me. He didn't say anything else, just stood there in the doorway. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. Do you want me to come inside? I asked, though I already knew I didn't want to. The man didn't move. The porch light flickered and went out, leaving us both in darkness, except for the faint glow from the TV inside. Suddenly, I heard the front door slam behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The man in the doorway was gone. I rushed back to my car, fumbling with my keys as I tried to start the engine. My hands shook. I looked back at the house. All the windows were dark again, and the front door was shut tight. I drove off as fast as I could, glancing in the rearview mirror for any sign that someone was following me. The road back to Angelo's felt longer than before. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. When I got back, Angelo was waiting by the counter. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. That delivery was weird. The guy at the door, the lights, the door slamming, I don't know. Angelo's face darkened. "Yeah, Marrow Lane. That place has a history." "What kind of history?" I asked. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Years ago, the family that lived there disappeared. The parents and their son. No one ever found out what happened. The house has been empty ever since. But every now and then we get an order from that address. The phone rings, someone places an order, but when we deliver, no one's ever home." I was skeptical, but Angelo looked serious. "The son, some say his spirit never left. The last time someone saw him, he was waiting for a delivery, just like you said." I swallowed hard. From that night on, I refused to deliver to Marrow Lane. But the calls kept coming, always from the same number, always the same order. Angelo said he'd handle them, but the mystery stuck with me. I wondered what the man really wanted, and if he was still waiting for that pizza all these years later. One night, I was driving home late after a shift when I passed Marrow Lane. The street lamp was out again, and the trees swayed in the wind. I looked toward the old house. In the upstairs window, a faint light flickered. And then I saw him, standing at the window, watching me. I sped away without looking back. The memory of that night still haunts me. Sometimes I swear I can hear footsteps behind me when I'm alone, or a faint whisper saying, "You're late." And I always wonder, what happens if I'm too late? Story, the end. I remember the first time I got the order for the old Whitaker house like it was yesterday, even though it was almost 10 years ago. I was working the late shift at Joey's Pizza, a small local place known mostly for being reliable and cheap. Deliveries usually weren't that exciting, mostly dorm rooms, offices, a few party houses on weekends. But that night, something about the call sent a weird vibe through me. It was just after 11 p.m. when the phone rang, and I took the order. The voice was quiet, older sounding, but fragile. No name, just an address. "Whitaker Road, number 42, the person said, barely above a whisper. I punched it into the GPS, noticed it was on the far edge of town, near the woods. I knew the place. It was a big old Victorian house that had been empty for years. Everybody said it was haunted, that no one had lived there since the last owners disappeared. Still, I didn't have the option to refuse deliveries, especially that late. It was a slow Friday night, and I needed the cash. I packed up the pizza, a large pepperoni with extra cheese, and grabbed the slip before hopping on my beat-up scooter. The street was quiet, colder than usual for early spring, and the wind rustled the trees like it was whispering secrets. When I pulled up to number 42, the house looked even creepier than I expected. The paint was peeling, the windows dark, some shattered, others boarded up. The porch sagged under years of neglect. No lights on, no signs of life. My heart started beating faster as I walked up, pizza in hand, wondering what kind of person would order from a place like this. I knocked on the door, louder than I intended, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. After a moment, it creaked open and an old man appeared. He was thin, almost skeletal, with pale skin stretched tight over his face and eyes that seemed too wide and dark. He didn't smile, just nodded and motioned for me to come in. Something about the way he moved was slow and unnatural, like he was moving through water. I hesitated, but followed him inside. The house was freezing. It smelled like damp wood and something sour, maybe mold. The old man led me down a narrow hallway lined with cracked wallpaper, past a broken staircase to a small room at the back. He sat down at a table covered in dust and cobwebs, but set the pizza box down carefully. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, counting out coins, then handed me exact change. Nothing extra. No tip. I said, "Thanks," feeling awkward, and turned to leave. As I walked back toward the door, I heard a faint whispering behind me. I stopped, heart hammering, but the house was silent again. When I stepped outside, the door slammed shut with a loud bang that made me jump. I hurried back to my scooter and sped off before I could think twice. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that delivery. Something was off. Too quiet, too cold, too unnatural. I told my manager about the weird delivery the next day. He shrugged and said, "Lots of strange orders come in from out that way. We just fill them." The next week, I got another call from the same number. The voice was even weaker, but the order was the same. A large pepperoni, extra cheese, no drinks or sides. The address was still 42 Whitaker Road. I debated skipping it, but it was part of the job. Besides, I thought maybe someone had moved in or it was a prank. When I arrived that second time, the house looked the same, dead and silent, but this time the porch light flickered weakly like a dying candle. I knocked again, but no one answered. I called out, "Pizza delivery," but only the echo of my own voice came back. I put the pizza on the doorstep, stepped back, and waited a moment. Nothing. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement in the upstairs window. Something pale, fleeting, almost like a face pressed against the glass. I bolted back to my scooter and left quickly. Over the following months, orders kept coming from that same number, always late at night, always the same pizza, always 42 Whitaker Road. Each time I went, the house seemed to shift. The porch light sometimes on, sometimes off, windows staring like empty eyes, the air colder than the last visit. Once I swore I heard the sound of footsteps behind me as I left, but when I turned, no one was there. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I showed up with a friend who was into urban legends and ghost hunting. We crept around the property, flashlight beams cutting through the thick darkness. The house was eerily silent except for the creak of the old boards under our feet. In the backyard, we found an old well covered with a rusted grate, half sunk into the ground. My friend shone his flashlight inside, and I swear I saw a faint shape down there, a pale, blurry figure that vanished when I blinked. We didn't stick around long after that. Back at the scooter, my friend showed me the pictures he had taken. Most were blurry, but one caught our breath. A translucent figure standing in the doorway of the house, face shadowed but eyes glowing faintly. The next day, I did some digging. The Whitaker family had indeed vanished decades ago, rumored to have been caught in a fire that destroyed much of the house. Neighbors said the house was never rebuilt, that the family was never found, and that strange lights and voices were sometimes seen and heard late at night. After that, I stopped delivering to 42 Whitaker Road, but the calls didn't stop. Sometimes the phone would ring with no caller ID. If I answered, there was just silence. Other times I'd hear faint whispering or the sound of shuffling footsteps on the other end. One night, after closing, the phone rang again. I answered, expecting silence, but this time a voice whispered, "Thank you for the pizza." It chilled me so much I almost dropped the phone. I looked at the clock. It was 3:33 a.m. That was the last time I ever worked late shifts. I quit soon after. Years later, I heard the old Whitaker house burned down completely, the site cleared and a new development built there. I never got a call from that number again. But sometimes when I pass by that street, I swear I hear the faint rustle of a pizza box opening and a whisper in the wind. Thank you. Story the end. The night I got the call to deliver to 327 Elmwood Drive was the night I realized some places shouldn't have pizza delivered to them. It wasn't the address itself that set off alarms. It was the way the order came through and what happened afterward that changed how I looked at my job forever. I worked for a small local pizza place on the edge of town called Mike's Pizzeria. The place was nothing fancy, just a joint that mostly did deliveries to families and late-night college kids. I was 22, working part-time to cover rent and bills while finishing school. I had been delivering for nearly a year and had seen all sorts of odd customers and weird orders, but nothing that had scared me. Not really. It was a Thursday night. I was finishing up my shift around midnight when the order came in. a large Supreme, a side of garlic knots, and a 2-liter of soda. The delivery address was 327 Elmwood Drive. The notes were sparse but strange. Please ring the bell once, then wait 5 minutes. Leave pizza on the porch. Do not come inside. The phone number on the order looked normal enough, but when I tried to call for confirmation, it went straight to voicemail. That was odd, but not unheard of. Sometimes people didn't want to talk, especially if they were ordering late. I grabbed the order and loaded it into my thermal bag, then checked the address on my GPS. Elmwood Drive was a quiet suburban street, not far from the highway, but I didn't recognize the number. When I got to Elmwood Drive, the street was dimly lit with old street lamps casting long shadows. Number 327 was a 2-story house that looked out of place compared to the others on the street. It was an old Victorian-style house, peeling paint, overgrown bushes in the front yard. The porch light was flickering weakly, and the door looked worn but closed tight. I parked a little ways down the street so I wouldn't block the driveway and grabbed the bag. I looked at the notes again. Ring the bell once, then wait 5 minutes. The bell was an old-fashioned brass one, heavy and dull. I pressed it once firmly and stepped back to the sidewalk. The house was silent. The air felt heavy, almost like it was holding its breath. I looked at my watch and started counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. At 3 minutes, a faint sound came from inside the house. It was a low, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. 4 minutes, my skin prickled with unease. 5 minutes. I was about to knock on the door when I heard a soft voice from behind me whisper, "Please, don't go." I whirled around, but no one was there. The street was empty. The porch light blinked out. I swallowed hard, feeling a cold sweat break on my forehead. The front door creaked open just a crack, and I could see the darkness inside beyond the threshold. Against my better judgment, I set the pizza bag on the porch and stepped forward, peering into the doorway. "Hello," I called. No response. I took a step inside. The smell hit me immediately. A stale, sickly sweet odor, like rotting fruit mixed with damp wood. I glanced down the hallway. The house was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Shadows pooled in the corners. Suddenly I heard footsteps above me, slow and deliberate, on the creaking floorboards of the second story. A chill ran down my spine. I took 2 steps back outside, the porch floorboards groaning beneath me. The door slammed shut behind me. I bolted back to my car, heart pounding. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the curtains in the upstairs window move as if someone was watching me. Back at the pizza shop, I told my manager about the strange delivery. He gave me a serious look. "You sure about that address?" "Elmwood Drive has been mostly abandoned for years. That house was empty for a long time." "What? Then who ordered the pizza?" "No clue," he said. "Sometimes weird orders come through. No name, no one picking up the phone. I usually cancel them, but the system sends it through anyway." I shook my head. It didn't add up. The next night, the same order popped up on the system. Same address, same instructions. My stomach twisted in knots, but I needed the money. I decided to take the delivery again, telling myself it was just some prank or glitch. This time when I arrived, the house was darker than before. No porch light, no sound. I rang the bell once and waited. Nothing happened. I rang again. Suddenly a cold wind whipped around me, carrying a faint, sorrowful whisper. The front door creaked open wider this time. I heard footsteps behind the door, slow and heavy. I placed the pizza on the porch, and the door slammed shut. I heard a soft crying coming from inside. I jumped back in my car and left without looking back. The following week, the orders continued to come, always at night, always to 327 Elmwood Drive, with the same chilling instructions. I started researching the house, digging through old news articles and public records. Turns out, 20 years ago, a family of 4 lived there, a mother, father, and 2 kids. One night, there was a fire. The parents escaped, but the 2 children went missing. The house was burned badly and condemned, but no remains were found. The family left town and never returned. Neighbors said the house was haunted. People reported hearing children's laughter and cries coming from the empty lot where the house once stood. One night, feeling braver or maybe foolish, I decided to bring a friend with me and a flashlight. We arrived at the address after midnight. The house was just a burnt-out shell now, the walls blackened and collapsed. but the gate code still worked. We walked inside cautiously. Suddenly, we heard soft footsteps around us, like little feet padding on dry leaves. I called out, but only silence answered. Then the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter echoed around us, joyful and chilling. A sudden gust blew through the ruins, and we saw a small figure in a white dress fading in and out like a flickering candle. We ran, not looking back until we were safely in my car. I never took another delivery to that address. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I hear the faintest whisper on the phone line. Pizza. Story the end. The night was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel heavy. I was working the late shift at Tony's Pizzeria, a small local joint that mostly served the neighborhood college crowd. It was just past midnight on a Friday when the phone rang. The order crew, with a voice that sounded strangely muffled, almost as if the person was speaking through a thick wall or underwater. A large sausage and mushroom pizza, extra cheese, delivery, please. The address was odd, not far from the restaurant, but it was a long, winding road at the edge of town called Hollow Creek Lane. I knew the place well, mostly abandoned houses and dense woods lining either side. The sort of place you wouldn't want to be after dark, especially if you were alone. I told the guy it would be about 30 minutes and prepped the order. My coworker Jake was watching me with that "don't get yourself into trouble" look, but I shrugged it off. Delivering to weird addresses was part of the job. When the pizza was ready, I grabbed the box and hopped into my beat-up car. The streets were empty, save for the occasional car that passed by with its headlights cutting through the darkness. I put on some music and tried to shake the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. The drive down Hollow Creek Lane was unsettling from the start. The trees leaned over the road like skeletal fingers, and the moon barely peeked through the thick canopy. The deeper I drove, the more the houses seemed to disappear. One by one, the streetlights ended until I was driving by nothing but thick shadows and the sound of crickets. Eventually, I came upon the house number, 132 Hollow Creek Lane. The house was a tall, narrow Victorian that looked like it had been untouched for decades. Paint was peeling from the siding, and the porch sagged like it was about to collapse. The front yard was overgrown with weeds and dead leaves. I got out and carried the pizza box up the creaking wooden steps. The porch light flickered weakly. I rang the doorbell and waited. Silence. I knocked. Still nothing. I called out, "Pizza delivery," but my voice sounded swallowed by the night. The door creaked open slowly on its own, revealing nothing but blackness inside. My heart hammered. I thought about calling back to the shop to tell them the guy wasn't answering, but something kept me rooted there. I stepped inside, pizza in hand. The air was stale and cold, a stark contrast to the warm summer night outside. The floorboards groaned beneath me. I called out again, "Hello? Pizza for 132?" There was a faint rustling sound, like someone moving in the shadows upstairs. I took a deep breath, then headed towards the staircase. As I ascended, the air grew colder, and the smell of something rotten hit my nose. At the top of the stairs, a narrow hallway stretched into darkness. I saw a faint light flickering at the far end. I moved toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the room, I found an old television set, its screen glowing static. Beside it, a figure sat in a rocking chair. At first, I thought it was an old man wrapped in a blanket, but as I got closer, I realized there was no face, just a shadow where it should have been. I froze. The figure slowly turned towards me, and in a whispery voice said, "Thank you for bringing this." I nearly dropped the pizza. "Who are you?" I stammered. "Just someone who's been waiting," the figure said. "Hunger lasts longer than death." The room suddenly plunged into darkness, and I felt a cold breeze brush past me. I spun around and ran down the stairs, stumbling over the last step but catching myself. Outside, the night air felt like a balm. I jumped into my car and sped away, glancing in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw the figure standing in the doorway, watching me leave. Back at the shop, I told Jake what happened. He laughed and said, "Dude, that's the old Marrow house. They say the family that lived there died years ago, all mysteriously vanished one night. No one's lived there since." I didn't sleep well that night. Over the next week, I kept getting calls from that same number, always ordering the same pizza, always asking for delivery to 132 Hollow Creek Lane. Each time I tried to avoid going, but sometimes the dispatcher was short-staffed, and I had no choice. Each visit grew worse. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Doors would slam behind me, whispering voices echoed through the halls. Sometimes I would find strange objects on the porch, old toys, a cracked mirror, a broken clock, all soaked in dew, but somehow untouched by time. One night, after dropping off the pizza, I noticed my phone buzzing in my pocket. It was a text from the same number. "Thank you. You are not forgotten." I tried calling back, but the line was dead. I shared this with my manager, who shrugged and said the number was untraceable. I checked the police records. There were no active phone lines registered to that address. One night, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I brought a camera with me. I wanted to capture evidence to show someone else what was happening. When I reached the house, I felt a strange pull toward it, like something was calling me inside. I set up the camera at the edge of the porch and rang the bell. The door opened again, inviting me in. This time, I stepped inside cautiously, holding the pizza box in one hand, the camera in the other. The house was colder than ever. I heard footsteps upstairs, but no one was there. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision. The static from the television was louder now, filling the silence with a crackling noise. Suddenly, a voice whispered in my ear, "Stay a while." I spun around, but I was alone. I ran out, feeling eyes burning into my back. Once in my car, I played back the camera footage. At first, it was just static, but then a faint image appeared. An old woman, pale and hollow-eyed, sitting in the rocking chair, staring directly into the lens. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The next morning, the footage vanished from the memory card. I tried everything to recover it, but it was gone, as if it never existed. That was the last straw. I told the dispatcher to block the number. The calls stopped. But sometimes, when I'm driving home late at night, I swear I see a flicker of light from the woods near Hollow Creek Lane and the faint scent of something burning in the air. And I still get that haunting feeling that some orders are never truly delivered. Story the end. The night had already stretched long into the early morning hours by the time I got the call for the last delivery of my shift. It was a Friday in late October, the kind of night where the air hangs heavy with cold and the streets are nearly deserted, except for the occasional lone car cutting through neighborhoods cloaked in shadows. I worked as a pizza delivery driver for a local joint in a mid-sized town in upstate New York, a place that hadn't quite caught up with the times, where old houses stood next to newer builds, and some parts of town felt stuck in decades past. I'd been on the road for hours, the tires of my old rattling Ford barely holding on as I wound my way through the sleepy streets. My last delivery was to a house on Halcyon Road, a narrow, winding street on the outskirts of town where the trees grew thick and the streetlights flickered intermittently, struggling to keep the darkness at bay. The address, 45 Halcyon Road, was the kind of place my manager warned me about in hushed tones. A big, isolated Victorian house at the end of the lane, long abandoned, or so the rumors said. But the order was paid online, tipped generously, and the dispatcher told me to get it there fast. I didn't ask questions. As I drove down Halcyon Road, the world outside my windshield blurred into shadows. The trees arched overhead like gnarled fingers, and patches of fog drifted along the ground, wrapping the road in a chilling embrace. The houses were spaced far apart, most shuttered and dark. Some looked condemned, with boarded windows and overgrown yards. The kind of place people didn't visit after sundown. I reached number 45, a massive, 3-story house with peeling paint and shutters hanging askew. Its porch sagged, and the front yard was wild with untrimmed bushes and dead leaves swirling in the gusts. The only light came from the pale moon, casting long, eerie shadows across the facade. I stepped out of the car, pizza bag in hand, and felt the sudden drop in temperature hit me like a wall. The cold wasn't just from the autumn night air, it was something else, something heavy and suffocating. My breath came out in little clouds and my skin prickled. I walked up the cracked stone steps to the front door, which was painted a faded, chipped green. I knocked once, sharply. The sound echoed through the empty street, but there was no response. I knocked again, louder this time. The silence stretched. Finally, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow crack of darkness inside. No light, no sound. Then a voice, thin and quiet, whispered, "Come in." I hesitated. The rational part of me screamed to turn around, to leave, but I reminded myself I was just there to deliver pizza. I stepped inside. The door shut behind me with a dull thud, and the darkness swallowed me whole. The air inside was cold and stale, thick with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. I could barely make out the shape of the foyer, a long hallway stretching into shadow. The floorboards creaked underfoot. "Right this way," the voice said again, more insistent. I followed the sound down the hall. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper peeling in places, and portraits hung crookedly, paintings of somber faces with eyes that seemed to follow me. I came to a dimly lit parlor where a woman sat on an old rocking chair by the fireplace. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll left in the dark for too long. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale as moonlight. She wore a dress that seemed out of time, frayed and yellowed with age. "I've been waiting," she said softly. "I have your pizza," I managed, holding out the bag. She smiled, a slow, sad curl of her lips, and reached toward me. As her fingers brushed the bag, a sudden chill shot through my arm, and the room seemed to shift. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and heavy. Turning, I saw a man standing in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a shadowed face and eyes that glowed faintly red in the dark. His presence was oppressive, like a dark cloud pressing down. The woman's smile faded, and she whispered, "He's come." The man stepped forward, and the air grew colder still. My breath froze in my lungs. I dropped the pizza bag and backed away. "Leave," the woman urged, her voice trembling. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and fled through the dark halls, the heavy footsteps behind me growing louder, closer. I burst through the front door into the night air and didn't stop running until I reached my car. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine. The headlights illuminated the house one last time, dark, empty, and still. When I got back to the shop, I told my manager what had happened. He listened quietly and then looked at me with tired eyes. "That place," he said, "has been abandoned for decades. Nobody's lived there since a fire took the family years ago. Some say the spirits still wander, trapped between worlds." I quit the job a week later, the memory of that night haunting me long after the pizza was cold. Story. The end. The call came in just after midnight, when the usual lull had settled over the pizza shop. I had just finished cleaning up my station, ready to clock out, when the phone rang. It was an order for a single pizza, a large pepperoni with extra cheese, to be delivered to an address on Willow Creek Road. Willow Creek was on the edge of town, a stretch of winding roads and old houses surrounded by dense woods. I'd been delivering pizzas for about a year at this point and knew most of the neighborhoods well, but Willow Creek always gave me an uneasy feeling. It was the kind of place people warned you about when you were new in town, the kind of place where stories of strange disappearances and weird happenings seemed to linger like a fog. Still, it was a delivery, and I needed the money. I grabbed the box from the warming rack, double-checked the order slip, and headed out. The streets were quiet as I drove, the headlights cutting through the thick fog that had rolled in overnight. The usual streetlights were either broken or dim, casting long shadows that made the trees lining the road look like they had claws. As I reached Willow Creek Road, the houses were spaced farther apart, and the trees seemed to press closer to the road. The address was near the end of the lane, an old two-story farmhouse set back from the road. The paint was peeling, and the yard was wild and overgrown, no car in the driveway. The porch light was on, but flickering weakly, as if struggling to stay alive. I parked, grabbed the pizza, and walked up the cracked steps. When I rang the doorbell, the sound echoed oddly in the heavy silence. There was no response. I knocked. Still nothing. I called out, "Hello? Pizza delivery." From somewhere inside came a faint rustling. I pressed my ear to the door but couldn't make out anything. After a moment, the door creaked open just a crack. A pale face peeked out. It was a man, maybe in his late 30s, but there was something off about him. His eyes were dark and hollow, and his skin had a sickly gray tint. His clothes looked old-fashioned, like something out of the 1950s. "You're late," he said softly. "I'm sorry," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The fog slowed me down. He didn't respond. Instead, he pushed the door open wider and motioned me inside. Against my better judgment, I stepped in. The inside was dimly lit by a single candle on a table. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something faintly metallic. "Leave it there," the man said, pointing to the table. I set the pizza down carefully. "Do you want to pay now?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Later." I frowned. "I can't leave without payment." The man's eyes darkened. "You'll get paid." I wasn't sure what that meant, but before I could say anything else, I heard a noise upstairs. Footsteps, slow and dragging. "Who's up there?" I asked, turning toward the staircase. The man said nothing. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. I froze. Then, out of the shadows, a little girl appeared. She was pale like the man, dressed in an old-fashioned white dress, her eyes black and empty. She looked right at me and smiled. "Pizza," she said in a voice like dry leaves. I stumbled backward toward the door. The man's voice stopped me. "Don't be afraid. They're just hungry." Suddenly, the front door slammed shut. I tried to open it, but it was locked tight. The candle flickered and went out. In the darkness, the girl laughed. I was trapped. I don't remember how long I stood there, heart hammering, eyes straining to see in the blackness. Then the man spoke again. "Eat the pizza." I looked down. The box was open, steam rising. I didn't want to, but something compelled me to pick up a slice. As I bit into it, the room seemed to shift. The walls pulsed like they were breathing. When I swallowed, the girl's laughter turned into a scream. The door burst open. I ran without looking back. Back at the shop, I told Angelo what happened. He looked grim. "That place is cursed. The family that lived there vanished years ago. They say the mother lost her mind and locked the children inside, starving them." "Why would they order pizza?" I asked. He shook his head. "No one knows, but sometimes the hungry come calling." I never delivered to Willow Creek again. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the girl's laughter in the wind. Story the end. The night shift at Tony's Pizza was usually boring. Most orders were simple, a few slices here, a family-sized pepperoni there. Nothing out of the ordinary. I'd been delivering for nearly a year in this small town, and by now I knew the rhythm of the streets, the usual neighborhoods, the faces at the door. But one night, that rhythm got shattered. It started around midnight when the phone rang with an order for a large sausage pizza. The address was on Willow Creek Drive, a long, winding street that ran along the edge of town near the old industrial park. I delivered there a handful of times before, nothing strange. But this time the vibe felt different. I double-checked the order. Large sausage, extra cheese, no drinks. The name on the order was Mr. H, which struck me as odd. Usually customers gave full names or just Tony or Jessica. I shrugged it off and loaded the pizza into my insulated bag, ready to make the run. The drive out to Willow Creek was quiet, the roads slick with recent rain. As I turned onto the street, I noticed the houses were older, some abandoned, others barely lit. When I arrived at number 19, the porch light was flickering weakly. The place looked run down, the paint peeling, the windows grimy. I stepped out of my car, carrying the pizza bag, and approached the front door. I rang the bell and waited. After a moment, the door cracked open, and an elderly man appeared. His face was pale, almost waxy, and his eyes were glassy, reflecting the dim light. "Thanks for coming," he said softly, his voice raspy. I handed him the pizza and asked for the payment. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out some bills, handing me exact change. He didn't smile or make any small talk, just took the money and closed the door. Something about the interaction left me uneasy, but I shrugged it off. I got back in my car and headed back to the pizzeria. Over the next week, I received the same order from the same number, large sausage pizza to 19 Willow Creek, placed right around midnight each night. I told my manager it was weird, but he just laughed and said, "Free money, man. Don't question it." The second delivery was even stranger. When I arrived, the porch light was out and the house was cloaked in darkness. I knocked, called out, but no answer. I left the pizza on the doorstep and headed back. But on the way back, I felt like someone was watching me. I glanced in my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the yard. When I blinked, it was gone. The third time, I brought my phone along to record. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the temperature dropped noticeably. I heard faint whispers, but I couldn't make out the words. When I turned to look inside the windows, I thought I saw shadowy figures moving just beyond the curtains. I recorded the delivery as quickly as I could, took the payment from the man again, though this time he didn't even look at me. and left. I showed the footage to a friend who was into paranormal stuff. He said the whispers might be spirits trapped in the house. By now, I was genuinely scared but too stubborn to quit. One night, after delivering the pizza, I heard a soft tapping on my car window. I whipped around. No one was there. Then I heard it again, this time from the passenger side. I rolled down the window, heart pounding, but saw only empty street. The calls kept coming, the deliveries kept happening, and each time the unease grew heavier. One night I arrived to find the door wide open, swinging on broken hinges. I called out, but no one answered. I stepped inside, the pizza in my hand trembling. The air was thick with dust and decay. As I moved through the hallway, I saw old photographs lining the walls, faded images of a family, smiling children, happy moments frozen in time. Suddenly, a cold breeze brushed past me, and I heard a voice whisper, "Thank you." I dropped the pizza bag in shock. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging the house into darkness. I scrambled for my phone, flashlight on, and made a run for the exit. As I reached the front door, I glanced back and saw the elderly man standing at the top of the stairs, watching me silently. I sprinted out into the night, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd collapse. After that, I refused to deliver to Willow Creek Drive again. A few months later, I read in the local paper that the house at 19 Willow Creek had burned down under mysterious circumstances. No one was inside when the fire started, but neighbors reported strange lights and voices the night before. To this day, I avoid that street. Sometimes, when it rains and the wind blows just right, I swear I hear faint tapping on my window and a whisper, "Thank you for the pizza." Story the end. The first time I delivered to that house on Willow Lane, I didn't think anything of it. I'd been working as a pizza delivery driver for nearly 2 years, mostly just bringing pies to normal folks in normal neighborhoods. But that night, something about the order stuck with me. And when the second order came from the same place a week later, I realized some places don't want visitors, even if all you're carrying is a pizza. It was a slow Thursday night at Tony's Pizza, a small local joint tucked away on the edge of town. The kind of place where regular customers call in their orders and drivers know most of the names by heart. I was finishing up a double shift, my legs sore and my mind foggy from the constant drive-through chatter and repeated extra cheese requests. The clock had just rolled past 11 p.m. when the order popped up on the screen. A large pepperoni with extra olives, a side of cheesy bread, and a 2-liter of soda. The delivery address was 115 Willow Lane. The special instructions read, "Please knock once, then step back. Wait until the door opens. No need to ring the bell." There was no phone number on the order, which was unusual but not unheard of. I grabbed the pizza, threw it in my insulated delivery bag, and headed out. Willow Lane was a quiet, tree-lined street about 15 minutes from the shop, filled mostly with older homes and thick hedges. It was the kind of street where you didn't hear much noise after dark. When I pulled up to 115, the house was a 2-story craftsman style, darkened and silent, except for a single porch light flickering weakly. The front yard was overgrown, with dead leaves scattered across the walkway. The house had a sort of worn-down look, like no one had lived there for a while. I took a deep breath and walked up to the porch. The instructions said to knock once, so I raised my fist and rapped sharply on the wood. Almost immediately, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow gap. I could see a dimly lit hallway, but no one was visible. I called out, "Pizza delivery." No response. I stepped back as instructed and waited. The seconds ticked by, but the door didn't open further. I looked down at the porch and saw something that made my stomach tighten. A single small footprint in the dust on the step, muddy and child-sized. I frowned and glanced up again. The hallway was empty. Just as I was about to call out again, the door slammed shut with a loud bang. I jumped back, heart pounding. I stood frozen for a moment, then decided to leave the pizza on the porch, just as the order requested. I set the insulated bag down carefully, zipped it shut, and took a step back. As I started to turn toward my car, I heard a faint sound behind me, the unmistakable scraping noise of nails dragging across wood. I whipped around, but the porch was empty. The door was firmly shut. I blinked, feeling a cold shiver crawl down my spine. I got back into my car and pulled away slowly, keeping an eye on the house in my rearview mirror. The porch light flickered once more, then went out, plunging the house into darkness. I drove back to the shop and reported the delivery as complete. My manager raised an eyebrow. "You sure that place was legit?" I shrugged. "It's in the system." He frowned, but said nothing else. A few days later, the same order appeared again. Same pizza, same address, same instructions. I told my manager I wasn't comfortable going back, but he said the money was good and no one else wanted the run. So, against my better judgment, I took the delivery again. That night, when I arrived, the street was eerily quiet. The house looked even more rundown than before, the porch light completely out now. I knocked once. The door opened just a crack again, but this time I noticed something else. Faint scratches on the paint around the doorframe, long, thin gouges, like claw marks. I called out, "Pizza delivery." A soft voice whispered, "Thank you." My skin prickled. I stepped back, feeling the urge to get out of there fast. As I turned, I thought I heard footsteps behind me on the porch, but when I looked, there was nothing. I got back in my car and sped away. The next day, I looked up the history of the house online. It was chilling. 10 years ago, the previous owner, a woman named Evelyn, had lived there alone. She was a recluse, neighbors said, and was rumored to have gone mad after her young daughter died in a tragic accident in the house. The local papers had a short piece about it, a fire that started in the nursery with Evelyn escaping but her daughter never found. The house had been empty ever since. I told myself it was all coincidence, a glitch in the system, or some prank. But then the orders kept coming. Every few nights, the same order would pop up. No name, no phone number, just the same address and special instructions. One night, I asked my manager if anyone else had ever delivered there. "Nope," he said. "You're the only one." I started to dread the deliveries. Each time I would get the same eerie welcome. The single knock, the slow opening of the door, the empty hallway, the faint whisper of thanks, and the sense that something unseen was watching me. One night, I decided to bring a friend. We arrived at the house just before midnight. The porch light was out, the yard darker and more overgrown than I'd remembered. I knocked once. The door opened a crack. My friend, who was standing behind me, suddenly grabbed my arm. "I feel cold," she whispered. The temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath in the air. We set the pizza down on the porch. Then something moved behind the thin curtain in the living room window. A pale face of a little girl appeared briefly before vanishing. My friend screamed and we ran back to the car. I never went back to that house again. But the orders didn't stop. Sometimes, late at night, my phone buzzes with an order for 115 Willow Lane. I don't answer anymore because some deliveries aren't meant to be made. Story the end. It was just another typical Friday night at Joey's Pizza, the kind of place where the smell of dough and cheese hung in the air, thick and comforting. The late shift was winding down, and I was the only delivery driver left on the schedule. The restaurant was tucked away on the edge of town, serving a mix of college students and late-night workers. My car was loaded with about 5 orders when the phone rang again around 11:30 p.m. The voice on the other end was quiet and calm, a little too calm for this late hour. Large pepperoni, extra cheese, delivery to 57 Ravenwood Drive. I repeated the address back slowly. 57 Ravenwood Drive? Yes, the voice said softly. The number was close by, but Ravenwood Drive was known to have a few older homes, some of which had been abandoned for years. I figured it was an old house that still got occasional visitors. The order seemed normal enough, so I accepted it. When I pulled up to 57 Ravenwood, the street was unnervingly silent. The houses were spaced far apart, with towering oak trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. Number 57 was an old 2-story Victorian with chipped paint and a sagging porch. The front yard was overgrown and the mailbox hung crooked on its post. The porch light flickered weakly as I stepped out, pizza box in hand. I rang the doorbell and waited. Nothing. I knocked on the door. Still nothing. I called out, "Pizza delivery." After a moment, I heard soft footsteps retreating into the house. The door slowly creaked open, revealing a dim hallway lit only by the faint glow of a flickering candle. There was no one in sight. Unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. I set the pizza down on the worn wooden floor just inside the door and called out again. "Hello? I'm here with your order." The air was stale and cold. Then I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible. "Thank you." I jumped and spun around, but no one was there. The hallway was empty. I stepped back onto the porch and looked around. The windows were dark and dusty, and the whole house seemed frozen in time, untouched for years. I left quickly and got back in my car, shaking off the chill crawling up my spine. Back at the pizza shop, I told my manager, Lisa, about the delivery. She gave me a strange look. "That house has been abandoned for a decade," she said. "The last owner disappeared without a trace." I laughed it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The next night, the phone rang again. Large pepperoni, extra cheese, delivery to 57 Ravenwood Drive. I hesitated, but took the order. I figured it had to be some prank or someone messing with us. This time, when I got there, the door was locked. I knocked and rang the bell repeatedly, but no answer. I looked around, and on the porch, there was a small, crumpled piece of paper with the words, "Thank you," scrawled in shaky handwriting. I took a photo with my phone and left. That night, as I scrolled through my pictures, my heart skipped a beat. The photo of the porch showed a faint figure standing just inside the doorway. A woman in a long dress, her face blurred and shadowed. I showed the picture to Lisa the next day. "That's impossible," she said. "There's been no one living there for years. People say the house is haunted." Curious, I started digging into local records. Turns out the last owner, a woman named Margaret, was a recluse who lived alone after her husband died. She vanished one winter night in 2009. No one ever found her or any explanation for what happened. The deliveries kept coming, always the same order, always to the same address. Sometimes when I arrived, the house seemed to breathe with life. Lights flickered in the windows, shadows moved inside, and faint voices echoed through the walls. One night, I stayed in my car and watched. The porch light came on, and the door creaked open slowly. A pale figure appeared for a moment, just standing there before vanishing like smoke. I started feeling watched on every delivery. Once, I tried leaving a note on the porch asking who was ordering. The next day, the note was gone. Then, strange things began happening outside work. My phone would ring late at night. When I answered, there was nothing but static and a faint whisper. "Thank you." At home, I felt cold drafts and saw flickers of movement out of the corner of my eye. One night, I finally decided to confront the mystery. I went to 57 Ravenwood with my camera, voice recorder, and a flashlight. The house was darker than ever, the windows boarded up. I knocked on the door. No answer. I tried the handle. It creaked open. Inside, the air was thick and cold. I called out, "Margaret, is anyone here?" Suddenly, a soft sobbing filled the air. I followed the sound upstairs to a bedroom frozen in time. There, on the bed, lay an old diary. I opened it. The entries told a heartbreaking story of loneliness, loss, and despair. The last entry read, "I'm so tired. Maybe soon I'll be free." A chill ran down my spine. As I turned to leave, I saw her, the pale woman from the photo, standing at the doorway. Her eyes were full of sorrow. She whispered, "Thank you." Then she vanished. I ran outside, the cold night air burning my lungs. Since then, I haven't received any more orders to 57 Ravenwood, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear a faint whisper on the wind, a voice saying thank you. Story the end. The night I worked the late shift at the pizza place, it was already well past midnight when the call came in. The restaurant was mostly quiet. The kind of lull that happens in small towns once the last stragglers have tucked themselves in or moved on to other things. I was tired, but trying to push through. The tips were better at night, and I needed the extra cash. The order was for a single large pepperoni pizza, going to a house on the far edge of town, like a place called East Hollow. I hadn't been there before, and the dispatcher gave me a quick rundown. 237 Ravenwood Drive, old neighborhood, kind of out of the way, but the order's prepaid and the tip's good. East Hollow was one of those neighborhoods that always felt like it was stuck in the past. The houses were older, many of them unoccupied or left to fall apart. Streetlights were sparse, and on a night like this, the roads were nearly deserted. Driving through there after dark had always made me uneasy. There was just something about the quiet, too quiet, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. I loaded the pizza into the bag, put on my jacket, and set out. The drive was about 20 minutes from the restaurant, down winding streets bordered by thick trees whose branches clawed at the sky like fingers. The fog was thick that night, rolling low and swirling in the headlights, making it hard to see far ahead. When I arrived at 237 Ravenwood, the house was one of the oldest on the street, a two-story wooden structure with faded white paint peeling off the siding. The front porch sagged, and the yard was overgrown with weeds and dead leaves. The windows were dark, save for one faint light flickering behind the curtains on the second floor. I stepped out of the car, the air instantly feeling colder than the rest of the street, like the house was exhaling a chill that wrapped around me. I double-checked the order slip and made my way up the creaky wooden steps. The porch was littered with debris, broken flower pots, rotting wood, and the door itself looked like it hadn't been painted in years. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked firmly, hoping someone would hear me, but only the sound of the knocking echoed back. After a moment, the door creaked open a few inches. There was no one in sight, but a dim light flickered inside, casting strange shadows. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. Then, from inside, a voice whispered, barely audible, "Please, come in." I hesitated. The voice was weak, almost desperate, but it sounded like a woman's. Something inside me said not to go in, but I was paid to deliver pizza, not judge customers. I stepped inside. The door shut behind me with a dull thud, and the faint light came from an old oil lamp sitting on a rickety table near the stairs. The air was thick with dust and something else, a faint, metallic scent I couldn't place. The house was freezing cold, much colder than the night outside, and my breath came out in small clouds. The wallpaper was faded and peeling, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. I could hear the distant sound of dripping water somewhere in the dark. "Are you here to deliver the pizza?" the voice asked again, a little louder. I moved toward the hallway, clutching the pizza bag. The flickering light made the shadows dance on the walls, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure at the end of the hall. A woman standing still, her face hidden in the gloom. I swallowed hard and called out, "Here's your pizza." The figure didn't move. Then a sudden chill ran down my spine as the door at the far end of the hall slammed shut. I jumped. "Who's there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman stepped forward, and I finally saw her face, pale, with dark circles under hollow eyes, her lips cracked and dry. She was wearing a tattered dress that looked like it belonged to another century. "They're coming," she whispered. I looked around, heart pounding. The house felt alive somehow, like it was breathing, watching. "Who's coming?" I asked, but she didn't answer. Instead, she pointed behind me. I turned slowly. In the doorway stood a man, a tall figure, shadowed and looming. His eyes glowed faintly red, and his face was twisted into a cruel smile. "Leave now," the woman said, her voice urgent. But the man took a step forward, and I felt the cold rush in like a wave. I dropped the pizza bag and bolted for the door. My feet pounded on the floorboards as I sprinted through the hallways, the man's laughter echoing behind me. I didn't stop until I burst out into the night air, gasping and shaking. I didn't look back. When I got back to the restaurant, I told my manager what happened. He frowned and said, "That house, it's been empty for decades. They say the family who lived there disappeared one night, and no one's dared set foot inside since." I quit that night. But sometimes when I'm driving through that part of town late at night, I swear I see the faint flicker of a lamp in the window of 237 Ravenwood, and I hear a soft voice whispering my name. Story the end.